We're getting remarkable feedback from the people that are doing this about the kind of state that it puts them in, both engaged and present with the bigger picture.
Dr. Andrew Huberman is an esteemed neuroscientist and tenured professor at Stanford School of Medicine. He pioneers research in brain development, function, and neural plasticity.
I would say this is the fundamental step of any good morning. If you can learn to do this, you will do your best work. You are actually tuning up and making your neural circuits for focus and attention better.
Famously, Huberman talks a great deal of his extensive morning routine secrets to live a supercharged day.
So a lot of times people will say, how can I lift more, focus better, remember things better? It's like, well, let's think about the foundation of that.
Enhancing brain performance, combining physical activity, mindful practices, and strategic nutrition for optimal daily functioning.
And if you don't do this enough, you are messing yourself up in a number of ways.
So what does his morning routine focus on? And how can we learn from him to help ourselves start the day correctly without getting fatigued before the day even begins?
You know, I'll probably go into the grave saying this, so forgive me if people have heard me say this before, but the single best thing you can do for your sleep, your energy, your mood, your wakefulness, your metabolism is to get natural light in your eyes early in the day. So I get up, obviously I use the restroom, I drink some water. I do think that hydrating is very important.
Yes.
So I'll drink some water. And then the fundamental layer of health is to set your circadian rhythm. The simplest way to do that is to go outside for 10 minutes and get some bright light in your eyes. The system is set to make the rest of the day even better. Because we often hear about the perfect morning routine, but we're not thinking about how that routine influences the rest of the day's routine.
Yes.
Starting the day with sunlight exposure serves as another means of synchronizing your body's internal functions. Each morning, our bodies naturally release a surge of cortisol, often referred to as the stress hormone, which kickstarts our metabolism and bolsters our immune system. However, failing to signal to our bodies that it's morning by making contact with sunlight can delay this wake-up call, leading to sluggishness throughout the day. Consistently postponing exposure to daylight, such as waiting until the afternoon to venture outdoors, has been linked to conditions like insomnia and depression.
You do not have to look directly into the sun, but you do want to get outside out of shade cover if you can, because once every 24 hours, you're going to get a peak in cortisol, which is a healthy peak. You want that peak to happen early in the day because it sets up alertness for the remainder of the day. There are really nice studies done by my colleagues in Stanford Psychiatry and Biology Department showing that if that cortisol peak starts to drift too late in the day, you start seeing signs of depression. It's actually a well-known marker of depression. So you want that cortisol, almost stressed out, kind of, the day's beginning, I have a lot to do feeling. That's a healthy thing. You want that happening early in the day. The sunlight will wake you up. And what's really cool is that over time, you'll start to notice the sunlight waking you up more and more. The system becomes tuned up. If you miss a day, it's not the end of the world because it's as we call it, a slow integrating system, but don't miss more than one day. And if you live in an area where it's very cloudy outside, just know that the sunlight, the photons coming through that cloud cover are brighter than your brightest indoor lights. So get that morning light. It sets a number of things in motion, such as your melatonin rhythm to happen 16 hours later to help you fall asleep. I would say this is the fundamental step of any good morning. And if you don't do this enough, you are messing yourself up in a number of ways.
Huberman says, by looking at sunlight through a window, it's 50 times less effective than if that window were to be open. Mostly because those windows filter out a lot of the wavelengths of blue light that are essential for stimulating the eyes and this wake-up signal. Light can affect mood in several ways. By directly modulating the availability of neurotransmitters such as serotonin, which is involved in mood regulation, and by entraining and stabilizing circadian rhythms, thereby addressing circadian desynchronization and sleep disorders, which are rather common in people suffering from mental disorders. Therefore, in the last decades, light as an intervention, light therapy, has found an increasingly widespread use for treating mood and other psychiatric disorders.
So then I come back inside and then I do not drink caffeine right away. It's important in many ways to delay caffeine enough so that you can clear out some of the chemical signals in the brain and body that lead to that lead to a feeling of fatigue. So the longer you're awake, the more a molecule called adenosine builds up in your system. And when you sleep, you push that adenosine level back down.
Adenosine is a neurotransmitter that acts as the body's messenger, which tells your brain when it's time to rest. Throughout the day, as your brain works and uses energy, adenosine levels gradually build up. When these levels get high enough, they signal to your brain that it's time to wind down and get some sleep. The higher your adenosine levels in your brain, the more tired that you feel.
When you wake up in the morning, that adenosine level can be 0, but oftentimes there's still some hanging around. Caffeine is an adenosine antagonist. It blocks adenosine function. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's effectively what it does. So if you wake up and you've got, let's say 20%, let's make, this is arbitrary, but 20% of your adenosine still hasn't been cleared out, that's sort of a drowsiness that you woke up with. Then you go and you drink your coffee and you crush that ability of adenosine to have that effect, but it hasn't gone away. So that when your coffee wears off mid-morning, now that adenosine is there and you feel like there's a mid-morning crash or an afternoon crash. So I delay my caffeine intake for about 90 and ideally 120 minutes after I wake up. So caffeine in the form of coffee is great, but you should probably drink 2 volumes of water for every 1 volume of coffee you drink in order to hydrate. And a lot of people feel jittery when they drink caffeine, or they feel lightheaded, or they suddenly get hungry. Oftentimes that's because they're sodium depleted. There's a lot of good science now to support the fact that if you're feeling lightheaded or you feel like you have quote unquote low blood sugar, oftentimes taking a little pinch of salt, putting in some water and drinking that, maybe with some lemon juice to adjust the taste, all of a sudden your shaking stabilizes, you feel more alert. Why? Because salt and water have an interesting relationship. It increases blood volume, and oftentimes then you're getting more blood flow to the brain simply by increasing your sodium intake.
The firing of neurons is mediated by the entry of sodium into the nerve cells, and to some extent similarly with the exit of potassium. You also need electrolytes for your nerve cells to fire, so when you're dehydrated, you can't think or function as well. Andrew Huberman says that instead, drink water first thing in the day, given that caffeine is very dehydrating and it causes effects on the kidneys where you will start to excrete sodium, potassium, and electrolytes. He mentions that one way that you can avoid the afternoon crash that most of us experience is to delay your caffeine intake 90 to 120 minutes after you wake up. By prioritizing both sun exposure and exercise first, you'll be able to avoid the afternoon energy slump.
One is that everybody should be getting 120 to 150 and maybe even 150 to 180 minutes of so-called zone 2 cardio a week. This is the kind of cardiovascular exercise where you're doing work, you could have a conversation, but you're kind of at the threshold where it's not super easy to have a conversation. We're not talking sprints.
Andrew Huberman recommends a combination of Zone 2 and Zone 5 cardio training. Zone 2 includes activities that elevate your heart rate without causing undue stress, like brisk walking, light jogging, or cycling. Ensure that these sessions last for at least 45 minutes. On the other hand, Zone 5 exercises are rather intense workouts such as sprinting, heavy weightlifting, or high-intensity interval training. These are activities to push your heart rate to its maximum. By intelligently combining Zone 2 and Zone 5 training, one can achieve improved heart health, endurance, and metabolic function, all while keeping the workouts diverse and interesting.
There's just a myriad of effects on heart health, vascular health all over the body, gut microbiome, musculoskeletal stability, mental health, all these kinds of things. So I have a routine where I either weight train for an hour in the morning or I do a portion of that weekly cardio. And I just alternate, weight train one day, cardio the next, weight train, and then one day a week I don't do anything. I don't do any exercise. We could talk about that. Then I would shower and do my 90-minute work bout, but sometimes I do the 90-minute work bout first. And that's generally when I'm starting to drink the caffeine. And so this 90-minute work bout is a kind of combined meditation, but also functional work for me. So for me, that could be writing, it could be planning a podcast, it could be reading. It's something that's kind of hard. And the thing to understand about this 90-minute work bout is that you should expect some friction early on. It's not like you just flip a switch and you're in. that it takes some time to get into this focus mode, and throughout that time, your brain will flicker.
Meditation is a practice aimed to enhance one's core psychological capacities, such as attentional and emotional self-regulation. In several styles of practice, focused attention meditation involves sustaining attention to present moment experiences without emotional reaction and judgment, and has been found to produce significant beneficial outcomes, such as stress reduction and improvements in attention processing. During this time, Andrew Huberman mentioned that for 90 minutes, he'll typically try to perform mental activities such as reading a research article from start to finish, working on a document such as a grant or research paper, planning or researching for a podcast. He mentions trying to get his brain into a linear mode and avoid distraction that's created by social media, email, and the internet in general. If you want to do work that matters, you need to create a state of mind that lets you focus on what's important to you. The more input you receive from the outside world, the more likely it is that you get pulled away from your own ideas and priorities.
If you can learn to do this 90-minute bout, you will do your best work. And what's really wonderful is it's not just about the work that you perform in that bout. What ends up happening is really special. This sort of combined meditation work bout, as I'm calling it, has this effect of you are actually tuning up and making your neural circuits for focus and attention better. You can drop in like a laser. And so that's a holy part of my morning, as holy as the sunlight viewing. And it's something that's very hard to build in, but I actually schedule it just like I would a Zoom call. But that 90-minute work bout, if I can do all those things and then get that 90-minute work bout and then eat my lunch, I feel like the system is set to make the rest of the day even better. Because we often hear about the perfect morning routine, but we're not thinking about how that routine influences the rest of the day's routine.
Yes.
And in the end, it's all about the bigger picture, right? Because it's about not just what you do with your life, but how you're going to create good in the world.
All trauma, anxiety, fears, they all map back to stress in some way. You can have stress without trauma. You can have anxiety without trauma, but you can't really have trauma without stress and anxiety. How do I get calmer in the mind when my body is freaking out? It is possible to get comfortable in these agitated states so that your mind is okay when the body is feeling like it wants to tremble or move, that you can learn to suppress that activity. So the first thing for anyone trying to navigate stress is to understand what kind of stress they're dealing with. Are you exhausted and having a hard time getting your energy up? Or is your energy too high and you're having a hard time getting your energy down? Because the solutions to those are often quite different. It's very hard to control the mind with the mind. It can be done. I say when in moments of stress, either excessively alert stress or excessively fatigued stress, look to the body, because there are mechanisms that have been built into the body designed to do this. Now, the reason I can say that is that the physiological side, the double inhale exhale, is controlled by a specific set of neurons in the brainstem that Jack Feldman's lab discovered. Inhale emphasized breathing can be practiced in a way sort of away from stress in a kind of offline approach that can be beneficial for raising what we call stress threshold. So there's a whole other way to look at stress, which is to say, how do I get calmer in the mind when my body is freaking out? On the other side of things, when you're feeling overwhelmed and fatigued, there are two ways to approach that. First is the kind of foundation of fatigue, which is almost always poor sleep and scheduling of sleep. This is something that doesn't get discussed a lot, and I don't think I've discussed this on any podcast previously. But getting better at sleeping is a whole set of practices. But sleep is a slow tool. It's not a real-time tool, because if you're feeling exhausted and you have to get up and have your day, deal with children, deal with work, deal with life, we can talk about how to get better at sleeping, but in real time, what you want to do is you want to bring more alertness into the system, focus and alertness. The way to do that is to take advantage of a very well-established medical fact. All medical students learn this, all MBs know this, which is that there's a direct relationship between how you breathe and your heart rate. So when we inhale, it almost feels like everything's moving up. But actually what happens is our diaphragm moves down. When that happens, our heart literally gets a little bit bigger. The volume of the heart gets a little bit bigger. which means that whatever blood in there is moving per unit time a little bit slower. And there's a set of neurons in the heart called the sinoatrial node that sends a signal to the brain and says, hey, blood flow is slowing down. And the brain sends a signal back to the heart and says, okay, let's speed up, and speeds up the heart rate. So the short, concise way to put it is when you inhale more vigorously or longer, you're speeding up your heart rate. This actually, there's a name for it in the medical community, but the important thing to understand is as you inhale, you're sending a neural signal to your heart to speed up. And when you exhale, the diaphragm moves up, the heart gets a little bit smaller, literally because there's less space there. Then there's a signal sent to the brain, and the brain sends a signal back and says, slow down the heart rate. So if you want to become more alert, you actually can just simply make your inhales a little bit more vigorous or a little bit longer than your exhale. Longer or more vigorous inhales will speed up your heart rate and make you more alert. Longer or more vigorous exhales will slow down your heart rate and make you less alert. The repetitive breathing more quickly and deeply, this kind of thing, or some variant of that, all through the mouth or all through the nose, brings up the heart rate and causes the adrenal glands, which sit right above the kidneys, to secrete adrenaline. They make you more alert. And you see these big inflections in heart rate when people do this. Typically, it makes people feel agitated. At first, they feel a little bit agitated. And then when you exhale and hold your breath for 15 seconds or so, or what you're doing essentially is you're learning to be calm as your body is flooded with all this adrenaline and the heart rate is going. And that is 100% top-down control. What you're doing in those moments is you're learning to take your forebrain and say, fight the temptation to move. Fight the temptation to breathe. This particular pattern of breathing, 25 or 30 times followed by an exhale and a hold, and then a big inhale and a hold, sometimes doing more inhaling and exhaling type repetitive breathing. That is really somebody training themselves how to self-induce stress. And we know from some good literature and some emerging science that's still ongoing that it is possible to get comfortable in these agitated states so that your mind is okay, feels okay when the body is feeling like it wants to tremble or move, that you can learn to suppress that activity. The ice bath is another good example of this. Some people go straight to the ice bath because cold water will almost always induce a low level of stress in people. You have to kind of fight it. Even if you learn to love it,
you still have to every time jumping in there, okay, I got to control the mind essentially to calm.
Right. Exactly. So the body is saying, this is really cold. This is really cold.
Get out now.
And you're pushing back on that, and it's top-down control. It's pure top-down control. And you could do this any number of ways. There's actually something called the hour of pain. The hour of pain was actually described to me by a friend of mine, former military special operations guy, who said that they place you, this wasn't through military, but this is a kind of outside the military
extracurricular
extracurricular activities of placing you into one position on the floor, and you have to stay there for an hour, which can be excruciating. There's so much limbic friction where you want to move so badly because the stabilizing muscles of the body and the feedback in our musculoskeletal system says, move, move, move. I just want to move the tiniest bit. And so all that practice it's just a different version of the ice bath.
Yes.
You're learning top-down control. So, we started off with a question about trauma.
Yes.
And we'll get there. But I think it's very important, just to kind of summarize, that people understand, to just ask themselves the question, am I feeling too much agitation, or am I feeling too much exhaustion? If it's too much agitation, emphasize exhales and do the physiological sigh. Yoga Nidra is also a wonderful practice that is kind of the mirror image of superoxygenation breathing. It involves long exhale breathing, lying down on your back, completely relaxing your body, and learning to completely turn off thinking, which sounds hard, but you can learn how to do it very quickly if you do that practice for about 10 minutes a day.
Yeah.